On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Mazi Mutafa, founding executive director of Words, Beats, and Life, a hip-hop nonprofit established in Washington, D.C. in 2002. Mr. Mutafa received his bachelor's degree in African American Studies from the University of Maryland and became a brother of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity. He has been a guest lecturer at the University of Maryland, Georgetown University, and George Washington University. In 2019, he was an adjunct professor at American University, co-teaching a course about international hip-hop called Whose Hip Hop Is It? As an expert in the fields of Muslimness, hip-hop culture, public arts, and arts education, creative employment, cultural diplomacy, and centering marginalized voices, Mr. Mutafa has made numerous media appearances. They have included all network TV stations in Washington, as well as NPR and other local public radio outlets, plus the Washington Post, Washington City Paper, Kids Post Washington, East of the River, and Washington Times. He contributed a chapter to the Handbook of Research on Black Males, published by Michigan State University Press, and an interview with Mazi is included in The Hip Hop Mindset, a professional practice on Rutledge Press. Mr. Mutafa is also the host of a hip-hop show called Live at 5, heard quarterly on WPFW 89.3 FM, featuring performances and interviews with MCs, poets, DJs, producers, and vocalists. Mr. Mutafa is also the host of a poetry and activism show called Something to Say, every Tuesday on WPFW 89.3 FM, featuring performances and interviews with poets, artists, activists, and leaders. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Mazi Mutafa, founding executive director of Words, Beats, and Life, a hip-hop nonprofit established in Washington, D.C. in 2002. Hello, how are you doing today?
Good afternoon. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here as well, so we can just dive in. So, one, what drew you as a political actor and organizer to work on Black life and justice? What might have been some of your formative experiences that brought these things together for you?
Well, I was one of those super duper seniors at the University of Maryland. When I originally arrived at campus, I was a business major because my grandfather told me if you're going to go to college, you should go for business. And my first day in the Smith School of Business and walking around with people in jackets and ties, at that time, I said, this is not for me. So then I became an English major because I enjoyed writing and reading and explaining things. And then I became English and philosophy because I took a class called Philosophy of Religion and it blew my mind. But I got tired of philosophy because it was just, for me at least, about tearing up other people's arguments. And so I took a couple of African American Studies class because African American Studies is actually why I went to college. I went and sat in on a class called Blacks in Popular Culture, African American Studies 202, my senior year in college. A friend of mine invited me to come and sit in, and it was the first time in my entire life where my life and things that matter to me were the center of discussion in a classroom. And that was what convinced me to come to the University of Maryland, even though I had already been accepted. I wasn't planning to go because I didn't enjoy high school very much. I thought college was like high school, except you live there, and who wants to live at high school? So I wasn't going. But that class changed my mind, and I took a semester off and came in the spring instead of in the fall. And in that journey of selecting majors, eventually I landed at English and African American Studies because what I found was that philosophy taught me how to destroy arguments, but not to build anything. And African American Studies helped me to look at history as a set of examples to consider for why things worked and didn't work. I got a chance to do independent studies as an African American Studies major and read a book that changed my life called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. It's like a 600-page book just about civil rights organizations that came into existence and stopped existing. And the primary reason why they stopped existing was because they were often competing for resources, whether that was usually money. So a lot of times when we look back in 2025 at those black and white documentaries of people tearing each other down, oftentimes they were tearing each other down because they needed to convince the people that had access to resources that they were the better investment. It wasn't necessarily personal, it wasn't even necessarily political. It was that they believed that different approaches would achieve the goal that their funders had in mind. And it's funny today when we look at politics in America, it's the same thing at a bigger scale in terms of the people that they write the checks are calling the tunes, and that might be why so many of us don't like the music.
That's yeah, that's a good call.
But sorry, I said all that and I didn't answer your question because I wanted to use my life to build something, and I felt like being a part of the continuum of African American leadership, African diaspora leadership, I wanted to dedicate my life to building something, and I felt like Words Beats in Life would give me the opportunity to be able to dedicate my life to something that mattered to me.
So I actually want to ask a little bit more about that, right? So you wanted to build something. How did you come to Words Beats in Life being that thing?
I was one of those really unusual college students who was very involved from my freshman year. I ran for Black Student Union. I think my sophomore year was the first time I ran. I ran 2 times, and I won 2 times. Sorry, I ran 2 times on tickets and lost in both of those instances. And then eventually I ran by myself and I won that time. So I'm a former Black Student Union president. Before I became the Black Student Union president, each of those years where I lost, I either joined or started a student organization. So I'm a member of Phi Beta Sigma, the Epsilon Psi chapter at the University of Maryland. I pledged my senior year. I started an organization, or co-started an organization with a brother by the name of Jihad Aziz, who was a graduate student at the University of Maryland at the time, I believe in the counseling center. I know that the thing we created was in the counseling center, which was a group called Brothers in the Struggle, which was a Black male discussion group. And we ran that for a year. And when I'm out marketing, I had lots of sisters come up and say, why is it Brothers in the Struggle? Can't sisters be in the struggle too? And so then we created Sisters in the Struggle, so they have their own female Black women's discussion space. And then we decided that discussing was great, but what are we going to do about all this stuff we're talking about? So then we created United in the Struggle to actually go out in the world and do things. And so that all that happened over the course of 2.5 years. Like I said, in part spawned by the fact that I ran for BSU and lost, but rather than just, go back to being a student, I decided I still wanted to do things to make the world better, or make the campus better at that time. And so one of the things I learned in the process of leading and starting these different organizations was there were many things that I cared about that my peers didn't care about. And I decided when I became the Black Student Union president, I wanted to create a hip hop conference that had been ideated with me my freshman year by the former Black Student Union president. His name is Safir Rob. I had asked him my freshman year, what was the one thing he wished he had done when he was BSU president that he didn't do? And he said, I wish I created a world-class hip hop conference that would have brought people from all over the world to the University of Maryland to celebrate the culture of hip hop. And so when I became BSU president, I decided to do the one thing my mentor said he hadn't, because I saw hip hop not just as music that people enjoyed or culture for people to participate in, but also as economic engine. That we at that time organized a trip to New York City for students to participate in a show that existed then called 106 in Park, because students wanted to do that. We created a hip hop career fair because people didn't just want to enjoy the music, they wanted to work in the industry. So we brought record labels and companies to the campus to be able to expose students to employment opportunities. And so I saw hip hop as the vehicle to teach skills that would not just be useful in entertainment or in community development or community organizing, but if you needed to organize a rally, how do you develop a flyer? How do you get the word out? How do you reserve the space? How do you get a budget if you need one? How do you get permits? All those things were skills we needed to have in order to organize the conference. And so my position was, rather than forcing people to care about things that they didn't care about, I preferred to just give them the tools that would allow them to do the things they needed to do when they needed to do them. If that was organizing a conference, they could do that. If that was organizing a rally, they could do that. If that was developing a campaign to promote a particular set of ideas to students, they could do that. And it would be up to the students to decide how they would use the things that they learned through that process.
That's amazing. Like, I think that really facilitating the space and the resources to do what they wanted, what students wanted to do, that's a really powerful way to engage people and ensure that people are invested in that work for themselves. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Uh, so you touched on it a little bit, how you went from business to philosophy to English, and adding African American studies. So what is the role of study itself in your political practice or your organizing practice? And I mean, obviously, hip hop definitely played a role in how you came to Words, Beats, and Life, but what is the continued role of art and expressive culture in what you do?
Well, study has been a part of Words, Beats, and Life since its inception. Unlike a lot of, or maybe not a lot, unlike some companies that get started, we didn't just jump out there and start doing what we wanted to do. The initial impetus for the nonprofit was to continue to do the conference at the University of Maryland. We just wanted to raise more money off campus to be able to provide programming on campus. But the new BSU president, the year after I graduated, decided that they didn't need the help of alumni to continue the conference. So myself and the co-founders of Words, Beats, and Life, which are Shatisha Jackson, Kaniqua Abdul Malik, and Steve Legierfo, got together and said, well, if we're not going to focus around this conference at the University of Maryland, what could we do? And I remembered this DC public school teacher who came, who said, this conference was great, but what do we do now? And like many college students, I had not thought at all about what could happen off of campus, or how the people that came from off campus could use or implement the things that they were learning to continue to do programming. So we decided to create the first initiative, the first initiative was an online journal that grew out of the second hip hop conference that was called Words, Beats, and Life. But then we decided to create an after school program that would be on Saturdays. We called it the Saturday Academy. And the goal was to do that once a month, every month, as a kind of community give back for the hip hop community, to volunteer its time to come out and engage with young people. Now, the study piece was we looked at what were other nonprofits, particularly hip hop nonprofits, doing at that time. And almost all of them were focused on building recording studios and kind of selling young people on the pipe dream of being a part of the rap music industry. And so we developed curriculum that went kind of in the opposite direction, that said, what about the other elements of hip hop, i.e. b-boying or dance, the visual piece, graffiti, or the music piece, DJing, production, etc. And so the very first class we taught was actually a DJ class, because regardless of where you live in America, every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there is a job for a DJ in your city, town, your campus. Regardless of where you live in America now, there's likely a mural festival that's happening. So there's people who, if they have the skills, can get commissions to be able to create large-scale public art. Most places you live in America now, there are also dance competitions where folks can come out and compete and build community and win prizes. There are tons of rappers who don't have a place to perform. I know this because every time we do something where there is an opportunity, my inbox gets flooded by MCs who I've never met, who've never volunteered, who've never engaged in anything that we've done, who want us to put them on a stage. So for me, for most of our 23-year history, I saw rap music as a dead end, not to be promoted by us. We didn't start actually teaching rap classes until our 10th year. We're now 23 years in. And the reason why we've started to include rap music is because we actually started to include poetry. And there are way more opportunities for poets to be able to publish, to be able to perform, to be able to record than there are for rappers. So again, like I've always thought about the culture and its practices as pathways to employment. And if you can't provide for yourself materially using the things that we teach, to me, it's not that it's a waste of time. It's just not as good a use of your time, considering at some point in your life, you're going to need to provide for yourself. So even in the early days, we thought about DJing as how can we train the next generation of campus DJs? So when we're encouraging young people to go to college, well, their very first job in college could be to be the DJ for their student group, for their fraternity, for their sorority, for whomever. And so we always thought about how to work using what it is that we taught. Part of that is about that crisis of the Negro intellectual. If money is the thing that divides us, how do we remove the need for money or the absence of money from the equation? How do we stop talking about things like competition, particularly in the nonprofit space, and talk about co-opetition? How are we cooperating with each other because we're competing to do good? Like, how are those civil rights leaders fighting with each other over money to make our lives and our communities and our conditions better? That's literally crazy. And so I decided when I started Words Beats in Life, I wasn't going to follow that model. We would find resources, but that it wouldn't be at the expense of peers, of individual artists or organizations. A long time ago, my bookkeeper said to me, Words Beats in Life can't be the only one that wins. Other people have to be able to win if they're going to see us as a community-based resource, as a partner, as a colleague, as a neighbor. Like it's like that neighbor who you have that plays music really loud, who doesn't consider the fact that you live next door and you have to sleep and you have like consideration and thoughtfulness have to be at the foundation of what you're doing, as opposed to competitiveness, undercutting, and belittling, And I feel like I learned that from my studies of African-American history, looking at the leaders that I admired and the organizations who did really transformational things, that they thought really big, they worked really big, and they made room for more people, like having expansive definitions of what it means to be Black. Marcus Garvey's Black was African, was Caribbean, was African-American. It was global. And so if we're going to be, participants in a community, I think it's important to look at how we have expansive definitions of things as opposed to limiting definitions.
Thank you. I think that there were a lot of things that could be built upon from what you said, and thinking about, one, like the ability to actually make money or support yourself from the resources and opportunities to learn that you are providing through the nonprofit, but also the idea that thoughtfulness is key, and that consideration for your neighbor, and making sure that it's not a competition, because everybody needs to be able to win and everybody needs to be able to eat. And it's not just making sure that you or your circle of people have that ability. I think that's really important in thinking about the ways that we approach practical Black studies, and like living that out through the organization and activist work that is so integral to the field itself. So kind of building on that, what do you think the work that you in Words Beats in Life does? What do you think that speaks to or says about the most pressing concerns of Black life today?
I mean, I think a couple of things in terms of the pressing matters of Black life, particularly in the United States today, I think have to do with a few things. One, almost nobody who I've mentioned up to this point, or any of the organizations I've mentioned up to this point, have been government. And I think that we have a crisis of vision in America for what Black leadership looks like. And I think that the reason why I'm saying it's a crisis is because the overwhelming majority of people who want to be leaders in the Black community today, more so than in the past, see government as the pathway to be a leader. And as opposed to, we come out of traditions where leaders were clergy, or leaders were community organizers, or leaders were, in some instances, educators. But thinking about the absence of large-scale, sustainable, either Black-focused or Black-led institutions that are not government, or that don't just rely on government. Like even Words Beats in Life, we are way overly reliant on local government in terms of funding, and we're working to do something about that. But the truth is, it took us to get to 23 years to be able to focus on how to expand our sources of revenue. I was talking to somebody at a festival yesterday about what are our sources of revenue, and I named like 8 things. He was like, "Oh wow, I thought you all just got grants." And it's like, no, we get grants, and those are the biggest checks, but we also count on individuals. We also count on merch sales. We also count on contracts. We also count on sponsorship. We also count. And so thinking about how to build a thing that has multiple stools of support. And I think the reason why I'm saying it's a crisis is because government comes with its own set of restrictions and obligations that a community-based organization doesn't necessarily have in the same way, that a place of worship doesn't necessarily have in the same way. But if I asked you to tell me name me 5 clergy in the United States who you would consider leaders in the Black community. Maybe you would say someone like a Reverend Jamal Bryant. Maybe you would say someone like a T.D. Jakes. Maybe you would say I'm blanking on the brother's name that does the I feel like he's from South Carolina, heavyset brother. He does work around poverty, but his work.
Reverend Barber.
Yes. So like I could name those 3 people. Maybe some people might say the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan maybe as a 4th, but like these are not people who are necessarily out in the media, out in communities, out in the world doing kind of large scale organizing, advocacy, institution building in a way that a Marcus Garvey was, and there are reasons for it. And I'm not beating up on those people, but I am saying, I think that there is something wrong that more of us are not trying to be leaders of things other than leaders in government at a kind of large scale.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because government, like I said, just has its own set of restrictions and challenges and obligations that I don't have as a leader of a smaller community-based organization, but it's having an impact in hundreds of lives every single week and thousands of lives every single year.
So that kind of
does that make sense what I'm saying? Like,
no, that does make sense. That absolutely makes sense. And I think particularly right now, the restrictions and guidelines and parameters within which government support is operating, increasingly so, it makes it harder to be able to rely on that, right? Like Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been defunded. Like the strings that come or the arbitrariness with which that funding can be taken away definitely hinders that being overly relied on in this moment in particular, but also in the past, because a lot of the activist work that has happened in the past has also not been able to be overly reliant on government funding or primarily on government funding, which I think speaks to, as you said, the role that clergy and community organizers have played in leadership in the past in a way that's not necessarily being as emphasized or promoted today.
Like I could not tell you, I know that there's one church in Southeast that a bunch of people point to. I could not tell you 3 people who are citywide leaders in Washington, D.C. that are clergy. I could point to maybe 2 or 3 community-based organizations that are DC focused and DC based that you could point to as examples of being led by people of color on behalf of people of color. Like one of the things, Words Beats in Life, I've never described it as a Black organization. I've always described it as a Black-led organization and a human-serving organization. And I make that distinction in part because most of the organizations in our country that are human-serving are white-led. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's something really important about Black folks being in charge of things that benefit everybody and not just benefiting us. I think that's important. Everybody doesn't agree with that, and that's okay. But I feel like that experience at the University of Maryland taught me that. When I became the president of the Black Student Union, I did more programming with Asian American, Latino, Jewish, Muslim people than I did in all the other student leadership leading up to that. Because all of my student leadership experience before the Black Student Union president was super Black centered, just about Black people, brothers in the struggle, sisters, versus BSU. I got elected because of African Student Association members who weren't seen as a part of the BSU at that time. I got elected because of Asian American students who showed up to vote for me as an individual. So that colored the way I thought about what service to humanity looks like, which is part of the motto of my fraternity: culture for service and service for humanity. And I think that's really important that we have people that are Black leaders, but also who are interested in serving humanity. And of course, we are a part of humanity, but not to the exclusion of other folks. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. Um, and I think that operates in the tradition of a lot of Black activism, even when it wasn't explicitly stated, right? Like improving conditions for Black people ultimately improve conditions for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing people in or having that upfront collaborative approach is not at all opposed to the work of Black activism and organizing and Black studies, period, historically. So that definitely makes sense to me. I feel like I was looking at this question here that I have about your specific activist practice in relationship to the history and future of Black organizing and political intervention. But I feel like you've kind of addressed that, at least it's in within the U.S. context. Is there anything you'd want to add to that, thinking perhaps more so across the diaspora? Or, yeah.
Well, one of the things about having led Words Beats in Life, we're a 23-year-old organization. We've worked in 20 other countries. And one of the things that I think is foundational to that international work is having a diaspora lens that comes out of participating in African American studies. But it's also some of the foundational texts that I read. I remember sitting in a dark room lit by a space heater in Uganda the first time I went, and people asking, because they had access to television and electricity and all those things in the places that I were, but I was also in a place that was very, very poor. And they asked me, why are we so behind? Like literally that question was asked to me by a 25-year-old man. Why are we so far behind the US? And I said, you don't know what happened? Like you don't know about the transatlantic slave trade? You don't know about how Europe underdeveloped Africa? You don't know these kind of foundational texts as an African-American studies major that you just take for granted that people know about history, that they've been taught about colonialism. They've been taught about all the things that you feel like I would just assume anybody knows that. And it's like, no, and that's not, and I'm not saying that like I knew those things before college, that I had been exposed to that in my K through 12 education, but going out into the world to be able to talk to people about what media they consume, what information they consume, really colors how it is that people see and understand and perceive what is currently, whether that's in their own country, in their own lives, and in the world. And so I feel like having done work in Senegal, having done work in South Africa, having done work in Uganda, having done work in the Middle East, having in Lebanon, in Pakistan, in China, in Brazil, that being able to go to all these places through hip hop, because I'm going there to visit hip hop communities and work with hip hop communities, to be able to learn what they know about their relationship to US imperialism, to the economic system that exists in America and around the world, that the conversations can be really deep or they can be really surface, depending on kind of what people are bringing to the table for the conversation, or what it is, or how they're engaging with the economic system in their country itself. Like Uganda the folks I was meeting with, I would describe them as not necessarily being affluent, though there were people in the room who were. There were people who were showing up to that same program in a Benz. It might have been their grandfather's Benz, but it was a Benz nonetheless. Thinking about the relationship of all these places to each other and the economic systems that they are participating in, I feel like was eye-opening to me. It is like when Marcus Garvey talked about every place he went in the world, like whoever was at the bottom, or the folks that were always at the bottom wherever he went, were Black folks. That's true even in a place where everyone in the country is Black. There are people, there's still upper classes, middle classes, and lower classes in terms of economics. But being able to see what are people doing about that. Like when I go to Uganda, which is the country I've visited the most, people will often talk bad about their own country. And I try to remind them as an outsider one, how much development I've seen in the last 17 years. Two, how almost nobody who they see works for someone else. Almost everybody has their own. They have motorcycles. Their Ubers are motorcycles, and we call them bora boras. You own your bora bora. If someone is a driver, they own or rent that car, but they work for themselves. Everyone is basically an independent contractor. And there's a power in that kind of independence that they might not see on television or hear in the media, that the people who they might be admiring wish they had. The kind of freedom, the kind of access to community. And so it's about helping people to see not just what they see, but how they see their lived experience. I feel like is part of what having a diaspora centered approach to community and community development is it's the lens that I'm looking at it through. Like, is Jamaica really different than Senegal? Yep. But are there also things that are similar, from challenges to benefits? Yep. And so being able to share those with people in those places who might not have ever visited the other, I think is part of being a cultural ambassador and a member of a community.
Thank you. I really like that that term, cultural ambassador, and being able to be in a position to make connections between different places, particularly within the diaspora, and allow people to see the commonalities that exist across places that they might not be able to ever visit themselves or that they hadn't considered before.
Can I also say that the diaspora is way bigger than most of us think it is or
Yeah.
talk about? So like one of the places I went was Saudi Arabia. And, it's Saudi Arabia. You think just a bunch of Arabs there. It's mad Africans there because people come there on pilgrimage and stay. Like, Saudi Arabia is a super Black place. We don't think about Saudi Arabia when we're talking about the African diaspora. We don't think about the Middle East as being part. There's so many Black people in so many places that are not Africa, the Caribbean, and America. So that's also the thing, is recognizing that the diaspora is bigger than even we talk about or think about, maybe.
What do you think, or I guess, how do you think that can be, the expansive nature of the diaspora can be taken more seriously and embraced more fully?
Well, I think part of the reason why people don't see it as bigger than the people that, first off, we have to recognize kind of a class bias or an educational bias, that being a student at the University of Maryland in African American Studies, I feel like that is probably where the concept of diaspora was introduced to me. I don't see it in popular culture, in traditional media, and because the talk from Black leadership isn't usually, the amplified talk isn't from community-based organizations or, kind of knowledge-based institutions. It's social media and popular culture and political leadership. Those are basically the three places where information from and about Black folks occurs in our country. So I think first, to have an expansive view of the diaspora, first people need to be introduced to the concept of diaspora. And then once they're introduced to it, to explain, yes, that these are the three primary places, the continent and the Americas, but there was also a sub-Saharan slave trade, but even beyond slavery, there are also people that literally migrated to other parts of the world from the continent, in the past and in the present. And so thinking about, I personally I don't remember ever being in a conversation where Europe was talked about as a part of the diaspora, when there's so many North Africans and sub-Saharan Africans that have moved to England and to various countries in Europe. I don't remember. So like, if you really, the diaspora really is not just global in principle, but global in reality. But we don't think about Black people being everywhere and being a place, but not necessarily being in control of a place. Like, this is where I'm saying the crisis is around Black institutions or Black-led institutions, if not. Like, I'm all for Black serving Black-led things, and I'm all for Black-led human serving things. And I'm even, because there's so many more of them, I'm even for, to some degree, white-led, human-serving things. But I think that to get back to that question about crisis, like when I go to meetings in the nonprofit community in Washington, D.C., the overwhelming majority of the people at the table with me are white and women. And to me, that's a problem, because the overwhelming majority of their organizations are serving people to look like us. And so we're the leaders of those things that look like us. Like, really? There's no qualified Black applicants who could be having these jobs. And the truth is, a lot of the people at the tables I'm at are like me, that they're founders, that they started a thing and they struggled and they built it over time. And so this is part of why I'm describing politics as an in destination, as a problem, because you're basically stepping into to help run somebody else's system as opposed to learning how to build your own. Even your own that's connected to a larger system, I think, has more value than just agreeing to go and run somebody else's thing. I think.
I would agree with that. For sure. So you've kind of touched on this, not only in what you've said about the crisis of Black leadership today, but also in talking about the diaspora and really taking seriously the fact that there are literally Black people everywhere. And they're a part of the diaspora too, just because they may not have a very large population or be as talked about in mainstream does not mean that they are not there and that there are not considerations that should be made about those communities. Historically, what do you think that Black politics has done well? So what are the lessons, the main lessons, right, from the history of political and activism work in Black spaces, whether that's diasporic spaces or more US-based spaces? What do you think has done well, and what do you think that maybe hasn't been done well?
Well, I think the easiest way to determine whether or not something was really working is what kind of opposition it faced from the larger system. That if what you do threatens the larger system, you will receive a great deal of opposition. A good friend of mine, Dr. Jared Ball, who is a person that works in media studies, he told me a long time ago that Words, Beats, and Life is not threatening. This is why you're successful. You're able to, grow your budget to $2.3 million because you don't threaten the system. And I'm not going to argue that he's wrong, because I think that what we do as an organization is work to prepare people to live in the system that is, but also to figure out how to carve out their own space for liberation and freedom. If you look at something like the Panthers Breakfast Program, it was so successful the government stole the idea. Mm-hmm. If you look at the work that Marcus Garvey did around the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the idea of building a diaspora of chapters of the organization around the world to organize Black people in communities to materially change their condition. If you look at the Nation of Islam in a religious context that's inspired by, or that is inspired by Garvey and those that came before him, around this idea of Black nationalism and economic nationalism. These are places we can look to as having various degrees of success. I think the thing that the Black leaders in the past have done better than anything is around the idea of educating people about culture and about history in a non-school environment. That you could listen to music, or you could watch film or witness art that told stories about places that you might not have known about and that no one taught you about in school, to build up the esteem and the aspirations of members of the Black community in ways that education and in some instances that even family did not. So culture, I feel like, is where we have excelled as community and as leadership. I think where we've really struggled is around establishing political agendas that outlive the people that created them. A lot of people might not know this, but the whole reason why the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Week, or CBC Week, happens in D.C., it was started after Dr. King was assassinated, and it was started in part because they wanted to, or at least the founders said that they wanted to establish an agenda that wasn't tied to one man, and that you couldn't literally kill the agenda because it was bigger than a person. And I think that the desire to do that is good. I think that the efforts to educate people through convening and gathering around public policy and around its implications for our lives is good. I think for a lot of people over time, though, like many things that get started for a cause, that as the people that started leave or die or move on to do something else, that the original meaning gets lost, and then CBC becomes another reason to party among kind of quote unquote the Black bourgeoisie. And so this is where the question of, again, like putting all this effort and energy into politics as opposed to community organizing, independent financing, developing banks and infrastructure, owning institutions and promoting them, creating educational opportunities in formal classrooms and informal ones. What are we doing around actually rediscovering why so many things were independent in the past? Why so many things were not a part of being greenlit by the larger power structure and system? And what was the power in that? What was the challenge? I mean, it's clear that one of the challenges was economic, but beyond that, what were the other challenges to being independent, to actually having our own, and to serving and living and working in our own communities? And I'm not a person that's like, some people I know are like, things were better during segregation. Like I would never argue that, but I do think things were different. And I do think that there's some value worth looking at in that bathwater, and not just throw out the baby and the bathwater. That there actually is value in saying, I want to promote and participate and support institutions that are built by people from my community, with my community, or for my community. And also think about the value of those institutions to the larger human family. That you don't have, like, you can be, again, a Black-led thing that is human serving. You can be a Black-owned business, but be fine with collecting money from people beyond your community so that you can actually grow and develop and thrive and not just get by, you know? And so I think that people have done a lot more well or right in the past than we give them credit for. And I also think that the mistakes that they were made were often more personal than political, that they were more about, human frailty and the restrictions that come with receiving money from particular people. Like I know so many friends who are like, I would never start a nonprofit because I don't want to raise money from these terrible people. And I always tell them, those terrible people don't give you money unless they actually want to do the thing that you say you want to do, right? So like, no one gives you money and then says, you know what, here's some money, but I want you to do this other thing instead. No, you have to tell them what you want to do, and then they decide whether or not they want to support. So you don't have to compromise yourself. You don't have to be immoral. You don't have to do things you don't agree with in order to accomplish the support that you want.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm rambling a little bit, but the larger point is like, a lot should be learned from the past. A lot of praise should be heaped on our elders and our ancestors for their willingness to make efforts to build things that benefit us. And we would do well to see value in their ambition and their achievement, and not just assume that they had a limited scope for their work because of restrictions in the larger society, but actually they really wanted to be servants of our community. They really wanted to build institutions that benefited their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that it is very easy to look back at things that have happened in the past and the actions that people took in the past, and to have a critical perspective of how people moved and what they did, without necessarily acknowledging the context within which they were operating, or, as you said, having praise for the things that were able to be accomplished, even within structures, systems in a society that had a lot of restrictions and a lot of limitations, and a lot of just outright opposition, governmental opposition to the things that they were trying to accomplish. So I think that that's always an important reminder that the things that have been accomplished should be acknowledged and celebrated, and within the context within they happened is important when looking back to think about what maybe could have been done better, because we're in a different context now. And there are different things that we are facing that may be similar but not the same as those things that have been faced in the past. So thank you for that. So at this point, right, I think you've shared a lot of really great information, and I'm really, really thankful for your perspective and everything you've said today, because I do think it's super important that we do have community organizations, nonprofits, and activists and organizers on the podcast. So what is one question or issue that you would like to see other organizers and activists asking now?
Well, I mean, I think that asking of themselves or of the community.
Either one or both.
I think one of the things that's not super clear to me, because it's been a couple of years since I've been on a college campus to talk to students. I taught a class at American University for a little while called Whose Hip Hop Is It? And it was a class for freshmen, really exploring global hip hop and the perspectives of people of various identities that participate in it. But I think the thing that is not clear to me is what, for this current group of college students / generation, what are the things you're willing to dedicate your life to? And it doesn't need to be abstract. It could be something as simple as like, I am a culinary artist. I want to prepare food that enhances the lived experiences of people that come to my restaurant. Or I am a marine biologist and I want to work on ensuring that when the ocean temperature goes across that red line that everyone's talking about, I'm going to do the work to try to bring it back down. Like, what are the things that you are willing to dedicate your life to? And it's not just about getting a job. It's really about purpose. And so I'd want to know from college students about what they see as their purpose in this moment. And ideally for not their entire lives, because we've also all been brainwashed to think that we're going to have like 17 jobs over the course of our lives. And we're going to have to pivot between careers and Okay, maybe. But, or that work's going away because AI is going to take everybody's job. But even one of the things that my generation was famous for was being like, I'm willing to die for the people, saying that, because they would hear that from people from the 70s and the 80s. Mm-hmm. People,
you're breaking up. Uh-oh.
There you are.
You're back now. Yes.
So I said, I remember when I graduated college, I'd sit on panels and I'd have people from my generation say that they were willing to die for the people. And I remember asking those people, but are you willing to live for the people? Are you willing to work for the people? Are you willing to dream with the people? Are you willing to have hope for and with the people? As opposed to, I'm just willing to be a martyr. And martyrdom is not easy because it is the end, but it is also not necessary in all cases. And so the question is, who and what are you willing to work for? When you look back at the end of your life, if you are so fortunate to have a moment to look back, are you going to say, I really used every bit of my talent, every bit of my grit, every bit of my will, every bit of my ability to do X? I just want to know what the X is, particularly for younger generations. I'm 47. I remember being 20 on a college campus and not thinking about anybody but myself. even as a student leader, but still just thinking about myself, what I could do on this campus. What is it that young people and leaders are aspiring to today? That's what I'd want to know.
Well, thank you. I think that that is an excellent question to leave it on in terms of having people think about that for themselves. I think that I actually might start asking that in my classes because I think it is a really important question. And I don't know that that is a conversation that this generation is having or conceptualizing in the same ways that it might have been overtly asked in the past. So thank
Can,
you.
can you do me one more favor when talking to your students? Because I just had this experience when talking to DC public high school students. We had a panel discussion and two panelists brought up the power of the Million Man March on their lives. And when I turned to the audience of students, I said, y'all have heard of the Million Man March? Not a single one of the 53 DC public school students had ever heard of the Million Man March. And so I'm wondering how bad a job we're doing at teaching recent Black history to, and the whole audience was Black except for one student, how bad a job we're doing at teaching recent Black history to Black folks.
Mm-hmm. So that is also very helpful, right? As Doug's for the department, that's something that's a question that I can pose to my faculty, right? Like those are conversations that we can have as a faculty. How are we informing our students, because most of them don't know, about this recent Black history? I know that like there are smaller things, like not something as necessarily consequential as the Million Man March that I've asked my students about, but even like the references that I make, even pop culture references they're no longer the same. Like it's no longer, they don't know what I'm talking about no more. And that's just 10, 15 years ago. So if we're thinking about 20, 30 years ago, they don't have a frame of reference for it. And I think it's really important that we give them that, because that isn't that long ago, right? Like that's their parents' generation, and they need to understand the things that have happened not just 80 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but the things that have happened before the turn of the last 25, 30 years, that were also very impactful and connected to the things that are happening today. So that's a question I'm going to pose to my faculty.
It probably would also be worth it to ask why we all know about the I Have a Dream speech. And why, like, what is it? What's the value beyond our community to us being told, having particular history reinforced and having other history completely ignored?
Yeah. I know that that's definitely a question that is talked about in the intro course. Like the type of history that you have been taught and what is the purpose of you knowing this side or this version and not having the other King speeches or not having been shown or played the Malcolm X speeches that were happening contemporarily with King. Yeah. Definitely important, particularly right now when people are rewriting history in schools. So thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to add? One, and then two, I definitely would like for you to share how people can support the organization Words, Beats, and Life, and the work that you all are doing in DC and internationally.
Yeah, I would say I would encourage people to look closer to home, to look at student groups on campus that often have really small groups of people doing a whole lot of work. So if you really want to make a difference, make it hyper locally on campus and encourage those groups to go out into community beyond campus. that's going to have a bigger impact on you, on the quality of your college experience and the communities that you're able to serve. And to not just think about service as picking up trash or um, volunteering at a soup kitchen, but thinking about how you take what it is that you're learning and go out and teach it to other folks. How you can do that each one teach one mantra, not just out and not even just out in the community, but in your dorms, talking to people about what you're learning in class, to think about your knowledge as useful and not just um, required. Like that it's actually the things that you're learning, whether you're an engineer or a kinesiology major, that the things you're learning are actually useful to other people in your life and community, and that your time, your effort, your labor can be useful in advancing the missions and purposes of organizations on your very campus to serve your larger community. You can check in with Words Beats in Life on Instagram. Our TikTok is trash, but it exists, on Facebook and on LinkedIn. We often hire college students to become youth development specialists to work with our young people or as marketing and media interns.
Thank you so much again. It has truly been a pleasure to speak with you today. And yeah, thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation.